Hi, welcome back to the Parenting Reboot. One of the topics I love to explore in this space is tech for good, where we chat with tech founders, possibly also who are parents who are trying to find safer tech alternatives in today's world. And our episode today sits at that sweet intersection between parenting, technology, and trust. We're growing up in a fast evolving digital world and we don't even have a roadmap for it. And that's where I want to welcome Megs Shah. She is our guest today, and she is an AI and data privacy ethicist, co-founder of the Parasol Cooperative, and the force behind Ruth, a trauma-informed AI chatbot designed specifically for survivors of violence. Today, we will be talking about trauma-informed technology, data privacy, what parents are possibly not getting right about online safety, as well as how to raise kids who are curious in a digitally safe world. Megs, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really excited to have this conversation. As a parent myself, I'm always looking for ways to be more informed. So happy to provide anything I know and maybe even learn something in the process.
Megs, you spoke about being a parent, so let's just start right there. How has it been like for you as not just like a tech founder, but also a mom in today's world? Like, how do those two go in hand, and what lessons are you learning from both lives?
As a parent, that you're always nervous about everything new coming out in the tech, and especially now with artificial intelligence, it's just driving me crazy, to be honest with you. I have a teenager, so I'm not in the sort of younger child that's just getting introduced. And, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, my son does not have any social media for that reason because I am so intimately aware of all of the different threats online. But that doesn't mean that he won't eventually have it, right?
Mhm.
And I think we're in a digital world and we can't be nomad, like we keep isolating ourselves from that digital world. So how do we do it safely? And that's really a lot of the conversation that I have as a parent with my son, pretty openly actually, to understand what his peers are talking about, where he's thinking he wants to engage a bit more, what does he want to use it for? And having that dialogue at being a teenager versus someone who's much younger, it's a very different dynamic, right? So as a parent, it's always scary to have anywhere you have your kid go out, whether it's a physical world or digital world. So best ways to do is to inform them and bring that sort of values and knowledge to them in a way that they can always come back to you if something does go wrong.
That's wonderful. Like, just being that space of trust from early on is what I'm hearing from you, right? Like, cultivating that relationship, making sure your kids understand probably who to trust, which is, your primary caregivers, parents, and then have those open-hearted conversations early on. So it's kind of easier when they navigate the tech world, right? So tell us your journey with the Parasol Cooperative. Like, how did that come about? The journey of now founding Ruth as well.
Yeah. So I guess kind of anchoring back on the trust equation just a moment, right? So I've been openly talking about my experience as a child being abused, sexually abused by someone we knew from a very young age. And when children are faced with a situation that is sort of not toxic, but it could be as simple as someone harassing them online, right? Versus something as dark as the one I went through. I think the challenge that becomes is, you feel ashamed and you don't want to have that conversation with people, and you end up in a situation where you sort of self isolate, and there's coping mechanisms that come as a result of this. And so for almost, you know, 30 some odd years, give or take, I'd never told my parents what had happened to me. And it wasn't because they were, like, it wasn't a safe space for me to say something. It just, I think we make up narratives in our head. And as a result of having that experience as a child, it kind of got into other toxic relationships as well over the period of time. And when the pandemic hit, one of the first thoughts I had as I was part of a single moms group on Facebook, some of whom were still in a very volatile situation, many of whom were pretty safe.
Hmm.
But the ones that were in a volatile situation, it got me wondering, like, how are they going to reach out for assistance with the lockdowns? What is going to happen? How do we help them?
Yeah.
And that's when my 25 plus odd years of working in tech was like, okay, we can solve this through tech, but like, is there really a problem space here? And so first couple of years largely was spent on researching, the issue that we had at hand, which was around domestic violence, that then led to sort of this multifaceted challenge that victim services organizations face normally, which is It could be related to substance abuse. It could have human trafficking components. It could have many different facets to it. And so we uncovered several different areas which really weren't necessarily, I would say, specifically targeting for us initially. And then over a period of time, as we assessed it, there were two specific things kind of that popped up. One was, how do I coordinate a call with someone who can help me get out of an unsafe situation?
Hmm.
Because the traditional means are unsafe, right? Like email,
Yeah.
text, et cetera, can be easily
Yeah.
accessible. And then there was this other component where access to information, like where people just didn't know who to call, what to say, what would be expected of them, what are their rights. So there was a lot more questions than answers. And so our goal was really to figure out a very pointed solution that was always survivor centered. And so that's
Hmm.
why we set out to prove that technology can protect instead of exploit people, which is what was happening at that time. And so building the opposite of what these tech companies have built with much safer products. So our ethos is privacy and safety by design.
Yeah.
That's the first thing we do. And that's really how we started Parasol and what we've built. So we're a group of survivors, advocates, and technologists that really focus in on making sure that technology is not being used to abuse people. And that's how Ruth came about, was to address that access issue of
Hmm.
information, equipping people with knowledge. So, and I'm a firm believer knowledge is something no one can take away from you, right? And so if we empower people with the knowledge, they have the agency to make the right calls for themselves.
So how has it been? Like, what's the outcome that you're seeing with Ruth? Like, tell us in numbers, if it's available to you, how many lives it's been able to impact. And I want to say, has it been like 2+ years of Ruth already?
No, so it's only been a year and change, actually. It's not even been a full 2 years yet. And in just past year, this 1 year, we've served up about 81,000 conversations. So this is chats initiated. And if we look at it from a actual conversation, like when you and I are talking, if we have four or more exchanges back and forth, that to me is a conversation, right? So if we
Mm.
look at it from that perspective, it's about 60,000 plus lives that were affected that have been using Ruth through our free version on our website or through the free version that's available on the National Domestic Violence Hotline's website. What we found interesting was we never actually marketed Ruth, right, in the
Mm.
traditional sense. And it was just sort of through word of mouth. And, obviously having the hotline be one of our primary partners in all of this became a huge deal because we're now actually being accessed across 170 countries,
Wow.
which we never imagined being at this point at this early stage. But really grateful that we're able to be the technology. And I tell our team all the time, we're probably one product company that hopes nobody has to use our product, which is just the opposite of what most product companies would hope for us. But we are grateful that our team has been able to make something that's available to survivors 24/7 wherever they are so that we can meet them in their journey and help them navigate to safety.
Wow, that is 170 countries. That is amazing. And to be able to achieve that in just a year's time, it tells you, like you said, like you want to be a product, you're a product that probably there shouldn't be much demand for it, but it actually tells you that more and more people see that this is a gap and they need something like this to be able to feel safe, to open up, to talk, and find the right kind of solutions. In the next part, I want to talk to you a bit about the ethical part of these things because I know you're a huge advocate for ethical technological uses, tech for good use, right? So, um, I I know you mentioned privacy being a big component when it comes to designing ethical AI products. Can you tell us a bit more about what makes Ruth stand out in comparison to probably other AI chatbots already out there? And, and the larger landscape being everybody's using AI already as their not just personal assistants, but their confidant, their support systems, and therapists for that matter, right? So, where does Ruth fit into all of this? And how is it like ethically different from other AI bots?
I mean, I'll say artificial intelligence as a whole has come such a long way, right? But when we talk about responsible and ethical AI development, there's this term is being used a lot, and
Yeah.
there's not really a clear definition for it. And so I call it the ethical trinity that needs to be there, and all these marketing terms, right? So safety, privacy, dignity, those are the three things that we must always keep in mind when we build any kind of tech, but especially around AI, right? Because safety to me means that it's not giving wrong information. It's able to detect those crisis signals, that it's not manipulating the person to cause harm either to themselves or to other people, which is what we're seeing a lot in the headlines today, right?
Yeah.
With teenagers that are being affected with psychosis and other things. That's just
Yeah.
it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
The second part, which is really the privacy aspect. So uh, we always take the lens basically when we create features of any kind for any product that we've built, right? Is how can this harm someone?
Mm.
And how can we ensure that the data that we are collecting and that they're trusting us with isn't going to harm them further?
Yeah.
Right? And that's really where the privacy side of it comes into play, which is don't collect the data you don't need, right? So I'm a big fan of data
Yeah.
minimization. Don't sell it. That's not ours to own in the first place. And, for us, when we created Ruth, an active thing that we had to think about was, well, if the conversation is saved and can be accessed later, can a survivor be at risk as a
Mm.
result of having a conversation, right? So we don't have a requirement for creating any accounts. We don't
Mm.
have a requirement for providing any details. We actually encourage them, in fact, not to send us any personally identifiable information. The only thing we ask for is the age so that the conversation can be tailored to the person. And we also ask for the location, general location, not specific addresses. In fact, it won't let you send in a specific address.
Mm.
And the reason we do that is because then they can get some very customized resources in their area.
Mm.
And that way, not having to go around researching it on Google or anything like that. But privacy really is meant for that. So if we look at children's privacy online, right now it's just sort of a free for all.
Yeah.
There's data everywhere for these kids that I feel really bad about, which is one of the reasons why I've basically told my son he can't be on social media for right now. But I think that there's an aspect of privacy as a whole from a consumer standpoint. We need to be aware of whether that's an adult or a child. It matters not. Right? And then the third piece, which is really the dignity, this is where, we've gone to a point where humans are the product, right? Their data
Yeah.
is the product. And we've got to stop doing that, right? It's not optimizing for the app and for the revenue. We have to optimize for human safety and agency, right? We have to give them enough information to make the right decisions for themselves. Like if you go on any of the apps, data privacy policies are all legalese. None of
Mm.
them can be easily understood. You don't know how it's going to be used. Enough loopholes are in there because of the legal jargon that's been put in it. Simplifying that language makes a big difference, right? So we actually had one of a recent council review it from a data privacy standpoint for our terms of use, and they said this is the best written data privacy. And because we wrote it in simple
Wow.
language, we don't want people to be confused about how we're going to do anything with their data. And I think giving that dignity and giving them, that sort of understanding that yes, this is complicated. Here's how we're doing it. It's your choice at the end of the day whether you want to do this or not, right? So
Mm.
that's the way I see it is those three things are cornerstone to anything that you build as far as ethical AI or tech is concerned.
Wow. That's a really good mental model for anybody who's interested in actually not only starting up in the AI space, but also being an active user of any kind of AI tools out there, right? To sort of be on the watch for whether it meets these parameters to make sure you're safe, to make sure your data's safe, and you feel comfortable engaging. Because, like, at the rate AI is accelerating, I feel like tomorrow we're all gonna be kind of extremely dependent on these things to run our lives. It's a scary thought,
Absolutely.
but
Well, I think we've already been doing that though, right? Like
yeah,
when we went on Amazon to buy products and all of a sudden recommendations were made, that was AI, right? Like we just weren't having a conversation with it. That's the difference here, right? Like the large language models and the natural language processing that's occurring now with these large language models, right? It's different in how we engage with it, but it's been around for since like I think late 70s, early 80s, right? So
yeah.
this isn't necessarily new tech. It's just being used in a new way now, right? And I think that's really where we've got to get more informed and not so much afraid of what it could do. Really embrace how this could be used for good, because those people that are using it for ill intent, they're not stopping, right? So how do we make sure that we're educating ourselves in a positive way?
Which is where I feel like the next segment really, really is going to be probably the meat of our discussion is digital hygiene and toolkit for kids and families, because the focus of this entire podcast is parenting in the age of tech, right? So I want to dive into that aspect, right? What should parents know about digital safety? Maybe we can talk about top three on your list and like what tools can they use? Because you spoke rightly about the fact that we need to be more informed rather than be afraid of the tech. So digital safety,
Yeah.
top three, and what tools can they use?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously tools I'm gonna tote Ruth, but it's actually been built to help parents kind of navigate that conversation with kids. Absolutely. So
Mm,
I would encourage modeling some of the discussions ahead of time so that you know what kind of responses you might get and actually having that dialogue. Because sometimes we struggle with that, right? Struggle framing the conversation around it. And I think one of the key things that I would argue, and this is something my son and I, in fact, talked about just yesterday because we were talking because he's going to start looking at social media later this year. And I said, honestly, if there's ever anything that happens that you're ashamed of, I don't ever want you to feel like you can't tell me. I will not judge you at all. Right. And I think that when we punish our kids it's parenting, it's normal parenting, right? We
yeah.
have consequences for certain actions and that's normal. But what happens in a child's mind, which I'm kind of playing back on my history, right, was that I felt like I couldn't go to my mom because she might freak out and, would basically not say anything to anybody because of the community here. What would they think? And then, there's my dad who had like super angry man complex, right? And he loved his family. He would protect us with everything he had, but I didn't know what his reaction would be. So it's more that children end up managing your reaction to things,
Mm,
right? And so having some type of a dialogue that helps them to recognize that the situation is much more difficult than they can handle. And as parents, we need to understand how to temper our reaction when
yeah.
things that are not the norm that we would consider the norm, right? That we find to be, and maybe we've been groomed to think are shameful, we should really allow our kids to have that dialogue with us. And I think the tide is really turning in that. So that's my first thing is to really have that dialogue. And you can always do role play with Ruth to kind of understand how best to approach these conversations. The second thing is just knowing what's on your child's device, right? So, like, we do an audit every once in a while of what apps are on his phone, not because I want to know exactly what he's doing on them. I want to understand what these apps are, what are they requesting. So, and it kind of goes into my third point, which is really helping them recognize what the red
Mm,
flags. So, I've explained to him when you download an app in the App Store, for instance, you need to look at what data are they requesting,
mm,
why are they requesting that data? And is it optional for you to have it or not? And if it's optional, you can remove that option altogether and not share it. For instance, if they say, location is being shared, if you're playing a game, is it really necessary for you to know
mm,
my location if I'm playing a game? Right. So turning those configurations off, helping them understand what that means, and then just navigating certain sort of conversations, difficult conversations around, there will be instances where people or strangers are reaching out to you. They may even be people that you may recognize, in the past, but what are those flags that you need to look for? If they share images, if they're making you do things. Now, there's an aspect of this that's kind of concerning that we're seeing a pattern of as well, which is where these individuals are targeting certain vulnerabilities. For instance, if let's say, teenage girls, for instance, they love sharing their images on social media like Instagram, for instance.
yeah.
What they're noticing is there's people imitating other females to connect with
Yeah.
them, right? And then same thing for boys on gaming platforms like Discord, for instance, where individuals are pretending to be their age boys that are engaging with on conversation and things. So just getting an idea of what questions they should ask this person, setting up certain key phrases with their friends that they may know to who to play with, and just making sure that you have an open dialogue. And if you're not comfortable with them playing those and you want them to be able to play those, maybe put it in a public location that they can
Mm,
sit and play in a more open space instead of in their rooms, right?
mm,
So I think those certain behaviors are very important. As far as data is concerned, I would say that's a completely different conversation, right? Because that to
yeah.
me is that's did a TEDx talk a couple of years ago, and my thing was brushing our teeth. We were told was like the way to keep your mouth and tongue and everything healthy, right? Well, all the germs are everywhere else except your teeth in your mouth. And so the data that we're talking about here is everywhere. It's
Yeah.
everywhere. And so how do you ask for that data to be removed? So let's say, you were younger, you had a bunch of apps that you were using, go do an audit.
Hmm.
Not using any of those apps, you're not using any of those services, those retailers, et cetera, request that data to be taken off from their
Hmm.
website. Or if your kids were going to a specific daycare or specific program online, you can actually call them and say, "Hey, I don't use your service anymore. Please remove my child's information. I don't want to have that anymore." Right? So there's different policies, and modeling good behavior around that for yourself is also very important. Like, don't be on the phone all the time. Which is really hard to do. It's very addictive, but it's definitely important to model that behavior as well.
I mean, from the list that you outlined, which is, I think, a gem of a resource, I feel like there are so many takeaways for adults ourselves that we need to start practicing. Like I was thinking about downloading apps, and like the one thing I don't know why, but I've gotten into the habit of doing is ask the app not to track my data. You get that pop up, but that's it. Like I don't do an audit. I don't do an audit even of the screenshots I've saved or like stuff on my gallery that's just been piling up. And I think it's a useful reminder for us as adults to first sit and audit ourselves
Yeah.
before, being able to practice that in front of, I guess, our children so we can expect the same behaviors and have those answers, for any questions that they may have about like, why data privacy matters, why you shouldn't be, engaging in certain ways on social media, especially if you get a DM from somebody you don't know. Oh my God, and
But
you're
it's
right
so
about,
tricky. We're so used to just kind of downloading apps because we didn't think anything of it, right? For the longest time. But like
yeah.
I will tell you, like my son will say, he uses the word "unk" or "bro" with me, right? Like he's kind of funny that way. He will tell me, "Mom, you're not using this the right way. Like that's not what this is meant for." And I'm like, "All right, listen, stop teaching me tech, all right?" But to your point, like it's evolving so quickly, right? We don't ourselves know the answer, so how do we keep
Yeah.
up with it?
Yeah.
And I think some of that actually AI can help with, right? Understanding what's the newest, latest things and how do I address it and how do I fix it and how do I find it? The how to is very important for us as parents to understand so that we can approach it more effectively with our kids, I would say.
Yeah. But when you think about like this dialogue that perhaps parents and their children must have in terms of like data privacy, digital safety, things you could do online, things that can happen to you, are we reaching a space where there needs to be or there is too much parental supervision? Um, or are we helicoptering? I don't know if you've heard of that term, but are we becoming too much of a helicopter lives? I think a lot of parents worry about that because, kids don't like being after a certain age told
Yeah.
because like they understand the lingo or they know what they're up to, right? So talk to me about balance.
I mean, they make up lingo, right? Like half of the words my son uses, I have no idea what they mean. So, parental supervision is tricky, right? Supervision versus surveillance are two very different things to me. Supervision is, I trust you. You need to be open and honest with me. And when they are not, there are consequences with that, right?
Mm.
And that kind of goes back to my earlier point is building trust as we build the online digital footprint for these kids is critical. And so depending on the family, some parents may completely want to be hands off. Some people, they have no idea what's going on with their kids. They don't really, most of those kids are kind of uh, not really discussing their online activities with them. And then others are so far into it, like you said, like a helicopter parent that's just like, I need to know exactly where you were, what time you got there, you're with. When I grew up in an era where there was no tech, like thank God
Mm.
there wasn't, right? There's no proof of anything I did when I was younger. So that's good. But nowadays, we have Life 360, we have all these other products that we use to track exactly where our kids are. I wonder sometimes, and I ask my friend this question is, do you think you are actually indirectly grooming your daughter to be
Mm.
okay with being stalked? Right?
Oh.
So if a partner is saying, I need to know exactly where you are, what time you got there, how you got there, what's going on, who's going to be there. Yes, there's a protective aspect to it, right? But if I'm tracking your every location and then
Mm.
come home and I ask you questions about why were you there? Why were you there? Why were you there? Right? Now you're effectively opening up the door for people to
Wow.
accept, especially kids, to
Yeah.
accept that it's okay for someone to track exactly where I was at every given time of the day. Right. So is that really building trust? Would
Mm,
be my question, right? And I think that's one of the bigger sort of issues I have right now. Like even with my son, we don't like I purposely turned off on parental control location tracking.
mm,
And that's largely because I want him to know that he has the autonomy to go where he wants to go, but that he and I need to have the dialogue to
mm,
make sure he's telling me where he's going, right? He may not always disclose where he's going, but he will tell me, "Hey, mom, I want to go do this. Can we?" Right? That dialogue is really what we're trying to foster here instead of the accusatory nature of where were you? Were you there? Who's going with you? Now, when he starts driving, that's a different problem. That's when we're that's when we're gonna have to cross a different bridge. But I think, what's good is to actually ask questions and be curious, right? Being most of the time you'll get one word responses, and that's perfectly okay. But
mhm.
you're getting a response, right? Like, what's so fun about this app? Like, hey, I was thinking about downloading this app. What do you think? Like, what do you guys talk about? And I'll get like, bro, we just talk about sports. And that to me is sufficient enough. Like, okay, you talk about sports. That's great. And
Yeah.
then continue to reinforce the fact that the goal is for us to be open and honest about everything that's happening.
Mm,
If you're not going to open up to me, how am I going to know? And how am I going to make sure that I can protect you without overly monitoring you? Right? I don't want to monitor you.
yeah.
So, how do we open that up to ensure that you can navigate safely? And if you have questions or concerns, you can come to me, right? And I think there's a balancing act and it's never one right answer. I will say every family is different, right?
Yeah.
But I think having a bit more of that, doing that audit, talking to them about what they're doing with it, having their knowing who their friends are, their friends' parents are, just in
Mm,
case there's some need for you to reach out. Same things our parents did, right? Like when I grew up in India and my parents knew everybody that I was friends with and their parents, and they used to make phone calls through the landline, which is non-existent anymore, right? So, but I think that's really where I would focus some thoughts for parents is are you grooming them to accept this behavior from a partner when they grow up or
that's
from
really
anyone else?
that's a very different perspective. I wouldn't have guessed or
Yeah.
thought about it from that angle. Um, Something that a lot of parents should be aware of when they're trying to, understand whether they're being overprotective or if there's a way to be a bit more balanced. Yeah, I want to pivot and talk a bit more about, you know, children and the younger generation's well-being in an age of AI and social media, right? Just, pivoting and talking a bit more about that balance aspect. But when children are directly engaging with AI or engaging with social media, where does consent, come in when children are interacting with virtual reality stuff like with AI and how do parents talk about consent, talk about, you know, digital abuse to kids so they're able to build healthy relationship with technology in general.
And I just want to ask a clarifying question. When you mean
Yeah.
consent, you're talking about sort of
Like
the
online
autonomy
consent.
that they have. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple things, right? When we talk about consent, and I use consent as a physical as well as an online
Mm,
topic to discuss, right? Consent for girls and boys needs to be educated very. I had actually started playing games with my son very young, right? Like we'd play board games or other things, and I would model saying no, right? And he would have to adhere to that. And there were tantrums and there was, things that occurred that they weren't okay with. But then we'd have that conversation about why he felt that way, why he
mm,
felt it was unfair to say no, etc. Right. And over a period of time, that has changed into now relationships and consent in relationships. And then we've also talked about, like I said, with auditing online, one of the things that I would ask parents to educate their kids on is you know, there are certain websites that occur. So when you're curious about something, don't just go to a website. Ask me first, and we can look at
mm.
it together,
Yeah.
right? Because they are at an age appropriate time frame. They will start researching things on their own because their
Yeah.
peers are talking about it or some other thing they saw came up with it. And I think if we're able to then go into sort of this friendly nature with them to say, "Hey, I was curious at that age. What's going on with you?" Right? And opening up that door for them to understand that we're all human. We all do things that we're curious about. And sometimes that's good consequences. Sometimes it has bad consequences. And let's maybe figure out how to do that. But as far as digital is concerned, I would try to do a couple things, right? So you should ask them, does it require a login? If so, what data are they collecting? Are they asking
Mm,
for your birth date? Are you asking for your full name, your email address, etc.? I usually tend to create pseudonyms for
mhm,
online, right? And I generally recommend don't use the exact birthday, maybe change up the date and keep the year so that the parental controls are still in place.
yeah,
And then what's the policy mean in terms of data and how do you request them to remove it? And having that conversation throughout the time that you actually enable your child to have a device. Like my son has had a device since he was 13, right?
mm,
I was completely against it, but you know, there were some discussions had and he proved his point. And so we said, sure, let's get you a device. But that meant that there were certain guardrails depending on what he was doing with it, how much time he was spending on it. Could he regulate his own time?
mm,
And he couldn't regulate his own time. We would have to put a parental control app on his phone, right?
mm,
And so optimizing for their use in a safe way is a good thing.
mm,
But a lot of these apps are optimized for engagement.
yeah,
So one of the challenges parents are facing right now is these kids are on the phone and devices so often that they forget how to talk to people. And so having an offline day, as I call it, take a day, just nobody's on the phone. We put the phone away. We put notes out to everybody that it matters, that if there's an emergency, we'll have one person that's a bypass. They can call us.
yeah,
But outside of that, put the phone away as a family and do one
mm,
thing a day as a family.
mm,
So it helps them to understand that there's more to this life than just this one thing and do something fun, right? Like it's kind of like the no day concept, right? That you don't say no or yes day, I think it's called. But having that is one of the ways that I would suggest doing it. AI is a different beast,
yeah,
right? Um, many kids are using AI to do their homework, which makes me nervous, but such is life. Many of the AI companies now are requiring, they have to actually require a parental consent
mm,
in order to create a child's account. I don't know about you, but as a child, I know I could find ways around things that I wanted to get done, right? And so putting in the wrong age in the chatbots is ways that kids are getting around this specific thing. There's regulations that are being passed that can actually help with some of this, but there's really no clean answer. And again, it comes back to conversation. Sometimes families can't have a conversation that's clean enough because maybe the kids know way more than the parents do because
yeah,
of various reasons, right? In which case, I think it's important to just let them know that nothing can actually prevent them from helping if something happens, right?
mm,
That there's nothing wrong in reaching out for help if
mm.
there's ever happens. And I think that is a technology agnostic thing to do no matter what.
So I feel like the bottom line is just keep iterating on that trust, that foundation that, we've got your back no matter what happens, no matter whatever is the latest version of GPT or technology out there. You've got to have real conversations at home.
Yeah, and it's also auditing, right? Like audit the stuff. It's not like when I was growing up and we had internet history, my parents would look at that internet history,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So it was more about asking questions and being curious about what this child is interested in or how they're using it. And, you know, as a parent, I need to understand what those requirements are for data privacy that I'm comfortable with. Right? And then based on what I'm comfortable with, I educate my child on that, right? And to what to look for. That's really where I think a tool like Ruth comes in really handy is what are the things and what is age appropriate and how does
Hmm.
that work for specific age groups that I need to have the conversation with? Because I don't have all the answers. Like I trial and error like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
I think understanding that first for ourselves is very important. And then being able to educate our kids on it is the secondary aspect of it. Doing that audit is very, very important.
Percent. Like you mentioned Ruth to be a starting point for parents who potentially don't have let's say, all the resources or knowledge out there, aside from an AI tool such as Ruth, if there's one other thing you'd recommend for parents as a starting point on AI and digital safety, what would it be?
So I think that there's Common Sense Media has some really great content that they can go to, right? Common Sense Media has some really informative information about apps and tools and uses of AI, how to engage with kids, and they have several different toolkits as well. And it was developed largely because we were in this TV world where we had a rating of PG-13 and PG and et cetera, right? But
Mm.
the internet didn't, right? Common Sense Media started because of that, is to actually rate these sites and to rate the ability for kids to be safe there. Now, are they 100%? No, but it's a good starting point. Neither is Ruth, right? I would argue Ruth is also not 100%. Like these are all tools, but the judgment should end up being with the parent at the end of the
Of
day.
course, 100%. Well, I feel like we've had, oh my God, it's already been 40 minutes. I cannot believe there's still so much that we're unpacking, but I feel like this has already been such a enriching conversation. But before we wrap up, I just have two other things to, pick your brains on, Megs. One is, what is the future for Ruth moving forward? Like, what's the next chapter? And the other one before we wrap up is one parenting and one tech advice for all our parent listeners out there.
Absolutely. So, as far as Ruth is concerned, it's just starting, right? I think
Mm.
this is just hitting the surface level of what we've been able to do with partnering with more and more organizations. In fact, we're officially going to start expanding outside the US, hopefully this year, as we start to work with various different countries on how they approach this. But one of the things that I'm really excited about is we're actually looking to build out a youth
Mm.
version of Ruth, which is more specific to some of the nuanced issues that today's youth face and how they need to navigate to have healthy relationships, right? And so understanding and recognizing coercive and unhealthy dynamics is critical. And that's really what we're excited about with the youth Ruth aspect of it. And then we're going to continue advocating for policy to protect as part of using Ruth, but
Mm.
also just generally at the federal level, we're trying to advocate for uses of AI in a safe way. So that's something we're really looking forward to. Now, as far as so the thing that I would ask parents to kind of take away from today's conversation around technology, it's a double-edged sword.
Yep.
It can be good and it can be bad. And I think understanding the ways that it can be used for good or the ways that it can help someone enhance their capabilities is equally as important as understanding the fears around it.
That's true.
But don't let the fear stop you from doing something. Understand why you're afraid of it and then deal with it head on as
Mm.
far as your household is concerned. Every household is different. So protecting your family is something that you have to decide on how that dynamic will play out. But for us, it's really about working with parents, working with youth, working with advocates and survivors to build out technology that truly protects people.
Mhm.
And that's really where we're hoping for Parasol as a whole to go. And, you know, I, I, I feel like we're getting there and we're always going to continue iterating on it. So hopefully that answered your question. I hope.
100%. It does. Well, it's always amazing to see, especially women founders who are mothers using the space and really taking all the space to build tech for good. So it's really, really inspiring what you're doing, Megs. And without forgetting, one parenting, one tech rule.
One parenting, one tech role. Whew. Okay, off the top of my head, I think trust is a universal thing, whether that's tech or relationships. And that can be with peers, with parents, with anyone. And I think just as much as we want our kids to trust us, you know, we need to trust them. And the only way we can do that is if we teach them the values that they can use even when we're not there. And I think
Wow.
that's really the goal here is to prepare them in such a way that even when we're not around, that they're making the right decisions for themselves. And I think that is a novel and aspirational goal for every parent, right? But it really does set the right tone for you down the line if you're able to teach them. Again, knowledge is power no one can take away. And if you're giving them the knowledge, they're going to be in a good spot. So,
Wow. That's the perfect parenting and tech rule. Like I can see that Venn diagram, like around trust around the fact that you're making them, so empowered with knowledge that they're able to take that right decision even when you're not there. So such a inspiring and beautiful way to end this conversation, Megs. I'm going to drop in the link to Ruth and the Parasol Cooperative in the bio below. And I hope everybody's able to take away all the nuggets and amazing pieces of advice that you had to offer. Thank you so much once again for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me, and looking forward to any feedback that anybody has. So feel free. Anybody who uses it, we're always open to critical feedback as well as good ones.